It's June 5th, 1944, 11:30 p.m. I'm standing in a hangar in England, watching something that should probably get these men court-martialed. 13 paratroopers are sitting in a circle, combat razors in hand, shaving each other's heads into mohawks. Then they start mixing engine oil with charcoal and smearing it across their faces like war paint. An officer walks by, stops, stares. He opens his mouth to say something, probably to order them to stop this unauthorized non-regulation insanity. And then he just walks away. Because he knows. Everyone knows. In 6 hours, these men are jumping into France on what's basically a suicide mission. And if they want to die looking like Apache warriors instead of parade ground soldiers, well, that's their choice. I'm going to tell you the true story of the Filthy 13. And I need you to understand something right from the start. This isn't sanitized Hollywood history. This is about men who stole jeeps, blew up their own barracks, went AWOL every weekend, and somehow became the most effective demolition unit in the European theater. Hit that subscribe button right now, because stories like this, raw, documented, and completely insane, are exactly why this channel exists. Let me introduce you to Jake McNiece, and right away you need to know this. Jake was part Choctaw. Born in Maysville, Oklahoma in 1919, ninth of 10 children. Grew up during the Depression when being Native American meant you were treated like a second-class citizen in your own country. But Jake didn't care what anyone thought. He had this philosophy that would define his entire military career. And I'm going to quote him directly here because it's important. Any activity not directly concerned with killing the enemy is irrelevant. Think about that. Jake didn't care about spit-shined boots, didn't care about clean barracks, didn't care about saluting officers or following the chain of command. He cared about one thing, completing the mission. And here's what's incredible. The Army knew he was a problem. They knew he was constantly in trouble, but they also knew something else. When the shooting started, Jake McNiece was exactly the man you wanted leading your unit. Let me give you some context. Jake enlists in September 1942, gets assigned to the demolition section of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment. This is before the 101st Airborne even fully exists as we know it. And from day one, Jake starts gathering a crew, not the model soldiers, not the guys who graduate top of their class. Jake wants the troublemakers, the brawlers, the men who keep ending up in the stockade, because Jake understands something that most officers don't. The best soldiers aren't always the most obedient ones. So he builds his crew, Jack Hawkeye Woomer, George Goo Radeka, Robert Ragsman Cone, Roland Frenchy Barry Bow, John Peepnuts Hale. These aren't call signs assigned by command. These are nicknames earned through sheer personality and chaos. And then they end up in England, living in these Nissen huts, basically corrugated metal barrels, while they train for the invasion of Europe. Here's where they get their name, the Filthy 13. They refuse to bathe. Now, before you think they're just disgusting, let me explain the logic. In England, each soldier gets a water ration. You can use it for drinking, washing, whatever. But water means you can cook, and these men are poaching deer and rabbits from the neighboring manor, illegally hunting on British aristocrat land, cooking the game in their barracks, living like they're back in Oklahoma instead of in the army. When they do bathe, once a week maybe, they never wash their uniforms, ever. The smell becomes legendary. Other units complain, officers threaten punishment. Jake's response? We're going to jump into France soon and probably die. What's the army going to do? Kill us twice? And you know what? If you're already hooked by this story, hit that like button, because what I'm about to tell you about their training is going to blow your mind, okay? Let me paint you a picture of what the Filthy 13 did while stationed in England, because this is where they went from problem soldiers to absolute legends. They stole jeeps, not borrowed, stole. They'd take officers' jeeps for joyrides through the English countryside, return them with empty gas tanks, and act like nothing happened. They stole trains, actual trains. Jake and his men once hijacked a locomotive to get to London for the weekend. When MPs finally tracked them down, they were in a pub, drunk, challenging British soldiers to fight. They blew up barracks, their own barracks, just for fun. Testing explosives, they said, making sure they knew how to use them. The fact that they destroyed army property, irrelevant to the mission. They stole the colonel's whiskey multiple times. And I want you to understand, this wasn't just one bottle. They broke into the base officers' club and took entire cases. Then they'd throw parties in their Nissen huts while the colonel was having MPs search the entire base trying to figure out who was responsible. Everyone knew it was the Filthy 13. Everyone. But here's the thing. They couldn't be replaced. See, the Army had invested enormous amounts of money and time training these men. Paratroopers weren't just infantry, they were elite. Jump school at Fort Benning, specialized demolitions training at Camp McCall, months of preparation. And Jake's commanding officers really knew, that when these men jumped into France, they would complete their mission. So, what if they spent every weekend AWOL? So, what if they never followed regulations? When the shooting started, the Filthy 13 would fight harder than any Spitshine parade unit. Lieutenant Charles Mellon was their original officer. And here's something I found in the archives that most people don't know. Mellon wasn't like other officers. He didn't try to break Jake. He didn't try to force them to conform. He just gave them their objectives and let them figure out how to accomplish them. That created loyalty. Real loyalty. Not the kind you get from rank and regulations, the kind you get from mutual respect between warriors. Now, as D-Day approaches, every paratrooper knows what's coming. The invasion of Europe, the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. But also, statistically speaking, probable death. Paratrooper casualties in major operations were running 20-30%. For a demolition unit jumping in first, the brass was estimating 50% casualties, maybe higher. Jake makes a decision. If his men are going to die, they're going to die as warriors, not as anonymous soldiers in identical uniforms, as individuals, as Apaches. June 5th, 1944. Evening. The entire 101st Airborne is preparing for the jump. Thousands of men checking their equipment, writing last letters home, saying prayers. And in one corner of the airfield, Jake McNiece has gathered his 13 men, and he's got combat razors, and he's shaving their heads into mohawks. Now, I need to explain something about Native American warrior culture, because this isn't just Jake being rebellious. This is deeply meaningful. In Choctaw and Apache tradition, warriors preparing for battle would modify their appearance to signal their commitment. The mohawk, called a scalp lock, wasn't about intimidation. It was a statement. I am ready to die. I am offering my scalp to the enemy if they can take it. It's the opposite of cowardice. It's absolute courage. Then they start applying war paint. Engine oil mixed with charcoal, streaks across their faces. Some of them do patterns they remember from childhood stories. Others just smear it on randomly. And a photographer from Stars and Stripes sees this. Snaps a photo, 2 men painting each other's faces, mohawks clearly visible. That photo goes everywhere, becomes iconic. The image of American paratroopers on D-Day. What the photo doesn't show is what happens next. At 11:45 p.m., the Filthy 13 boards their C-47, aircraft from the 440th Troop Carrier Group. Their mission briefing was simple. Jump into the Cotentin Peninsula. Locate the bridges over the Douve River. Either capture them intact or blow them up to prevent German reinforcements from reaching the beaches. Simple. Except, the Germans know the paratroopers are coming. They've been expecting this for months. They've created defensive grids with cables strung between poles to snag parachutes. They've positioned anti-aircraft guns. They've mined the drop zones. As the C-47 crosses the English Channel, Jake is sitting in the door. He can see the red tracer fire coming up from France. It looks like someone's throwing strings of Christmas lights into the sky. Beautiful and deadly. The plane lurches. Flak bursts nearby. Shrapnel punches through the fuselage. A man across from Jake, Tommy Lonergan, gets hit in the leg before they even jump, just sitting there, and a piece of shrapnel tears through the plane and into his thigh. The green light flashes. Jump. Jake goes first. 13 men following him into the darkness, and immediately everything goes wrong. The planes have scattered because of the anti-aircraft fire. The drop zone is wrong. Men are landing miles from their objectives. The Germans are shooting at them as they descend. Some paratroopers hit the ground dead before their boots touch French soil. Jake lands hard in a hedgerow, these dense Norman hedges that are basically walls of earth and vegetation. He cuts himself loose from his chute and immediately starts looking for his men. He finds 3, just 3 out of 13. Lieutenant Mellon, their officer, is dead. Hit during the descent. John Dewey, wounded. Robert Cohn, missing. Half the unit is gone within the first 30 minutes. And here's where Jake does what Jake does best. He adapts. "We're going to the bridges," he tells the men he's found. "Anyone we meet along the way, we recruit. We complete the mission." For the next 5 hours, Jake and his remaining men move through occupied France in the darkness. They're picking up scattered paratroopers along the way, men from other units who are lost, separated from their commands. By dawn, Jake has assembled a force of about 20 men, not all from the Filthy 13, just whoever he found in the chaos. They reach the Douve River near the village of Brevans, and they can see the bridges, 2 of them, still standing. German troops dug in on the far side. Now, standard doctrine says you wait for support. You call for artillery. You coordinate with other units. You don't attack defended bridges with 20 men when there are probably 200 Germans. Jake doesn't care about standard doctrine. "We're demolition," he tells his makeshift squad. "Demolition doesn't need permission to blow things up. That's our job." They split up. Half the men create a diversion, firing on the German positions to draw attention. Jake and the demolition experts crawl to the bridges with satchel charges. The Germans are shooting. Mortars are landing. It's absolute chaos. Men are dying. But Jake is calm, methodical. He places the charges exactly where they need to go. Fuses, timers, and then they run. The first bridge explodes. Perfect detonation. The structure collapses into the river. They move to the second bridge. Same process. The Germans realize what's happening. They're pouring fire onto the American position. Men are getting hit, wounded, but the charges are in place. The second bridge explodes. And now, here's the part that's both tragic and hilarious. Back at the American command post, nobody knows the Filthy 13 succeeded. Radio communications are down. The chaos of D-Day means information is scattered. Senior officers assume the bridges are still standing. So, they call in the Air Force to bomb them. American bombers fly over and drop. Their payloads on bridges that are already destroyed. Jake and his men are still in the area, taking cover from their own bombs. When Jake finally makes radio contact and reports the bridges are down, the officer on the other end doesn't believe him. "The Air Force just bombed those bridges." "Yeah," Jake says. "They bombed rubble. We blew them up 5 hours ago." For the next 5 days, Jake and his survivors hold the area around Brevans. Cut off from American lines, low on ammunition, fighting running battles with German patrols trying to retake the crossing points. It's brutal. Close quarters combat, knives, grenades, the kind of fighting where you see the faces of the men you're killing. Of the original 13 men, only 6 make it back to England alive. The rest are dead or captured, but the mission is complete. The bridges are down, German reinforcements are delayed, and that delay contributes to the Allies capturing Carentan, the first major French city liberated after D-Day. And listen, if this story is hitting you as hard as it's hitting me to tell it, if you're feeling that mix of pride and sadness, hit that like button, because we're not done yet. The Filthy 13's war is just beginning. Here's what happened after Normandy. Jake McNiece survives, against all odds. He gets replacements for his fallen men, and the Filthy 13 reforms. September 1944. Operation Market Garden. They jump into Holland. Half the unit is killed or wounded in German bombing of Eindhoven, but they hold their bridges. December 1944. Battle of the Bulge. Jake volunteers for the Pathfinders, elite troops who jump in first to guide supply drops. Everyone thinks this will be safer. It's not. They parachute into surrounded Bastogne, expecting 80–90% casualties. Only 1 man dies. They successfully guide supply drops that save the 101st Airborne trapped in the city. Jake makes 4 combat jumps. This is statistically impossible. Most paratroopers never make one. The survival odds get exponentially worse with each jump. But Jake doesn't just survive. He's promoted to acting first sergeant by the end of the war. Not officially, he keeps getting busted back to private for disciplinary issues. But in combat, everyone knows he's the leader. February 1946. Jake is kicked out of the military. One last fight with MPs. He's done. He goes home to Oklahoma, works for the Postal Service for 28 years, lives a quiet life, marries, has children, never talks much about the war. And then in 1997, historian Richard Kilblane tracks him down and starts recording his story. The book, The Filthy 13, is published. Jake becomes a celebrity among World War II historians. In 2012, France awards Jake the Legion of Honor, the highest French decoration. 93-year-old Jake travels to France, stands on the same bridges he blew up 68 years earlier. French citizens line up to shake his hand and say, "Merci." Jake McNiece dies in 2013 at age 93. The last surviving member of the original Filthy 13 look. Here's why this story matters. The Filthy 13 were everything the military didn't want. Undisciplined, rebellious, constantly in trouble. They violated every regulation. They refused to conform. And they were exactly what the war needed, because war isn't won by men who follow orders blindly. It's won by men who understand the mission and will do whatever it takes to complete it. Jake and his men proved that you can honor your heritage, maintain your identity, and still be the most effective warriors on the battlefield. They showed that the spirit of the Apache, the refusal to surrender, the willingness to face death with courage, transcends any uniform. The Germans called them American savages. They said it as an insult, but Jake took it as a compliment. Type Apache in the comments if you made it to the end. And tell me, do you think the Army should have court-martialed these men, or were they exactly what we needed? Share this with someone who thinks war was only about polished uniforms and perfect discipline. They need to know the truth. And subscribe, hit that bell, because next week I'm covering the Ghost Army, the American unit that won battles with inflatable tanks and sound effects. The Germans thought they were fighting an entire division. It was 1,100 artists with rubber props. You won't believe what they did. Thank you for spending 15 minutes with me. The Filthy 13 deserve to be remembered, not as perfect soldiers, as real warriors. Stay strong. We'll see you in the next battle.